Natchez, Mississippi. August 14, 1868.
The night did not scream. It whispered first. A low rustle through the cotton stalks, a soft drag of boots across dry soil, and then steel, cold, clean, merciless. The moon hovered above the Mississippi fields, casting a pale shimmer that made everything look ghostly, especially the blood. The first scream was sharp, wet, cut short. It didn't echo. It died, swallowed by the thick August heat. The second came just seconds later, but it wasn't a scream. It was a gurgle, a warning that didn't reach anyone in time. By the time the wind shifted and the crickets fell silent, 7 overseers lay sprawled near the tool shed, their throats opened, their skulls cracked, their eyes frozen in terror. One man had a poker still in his hand. Another had tried to crawl away, his fingers dragging through the dirt like claws. But none made it far. Standing at the center of this crimson ring was a single man, barefoot, breath ragged, shirt soaked with blood and sweat. His hands trembled around the wooden handle of an axe, not with fear but with release. His name was unknown to most outside the quarters. Just another boy, another back bent in the field. But tonight he was not forgotten. Tonight he was fire in human form. You can almost hear the silence after the massacre, like even the air itself was afraid to breathe. The overseers had been drunk, full of laughter and pork ribs. Their laughter had filled the yard just hours earlier. One had even played the fiddle, poorly, near the kitchen. But now, their blood soaked into the very ground they once claimed as theirs, and the tool shed, it still held the others. Tools sharpened not for cotton but for reckoning. Imagine stumbling upon that scene, the axes, the bodies, the stench of iron and smoke mixing in the thick southern air, and the full moon glowing like an eye that had seen too much. The horses in the stables were restless now. They had sensed it before anyone. Animals always do. One kicked its gait, another neighed into the dark, a long rising panic that hadn't yet reached the main house. But it would, because this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The man with the axe turned his head slowly, scanning the horizon, not for escape but for more. His chest rose and fell like thunder in a bottle. Not fast, not frantic, but purposeful, calculated. And in the stillness, you might ask, why didn't he run? What did they do to deserve this? Or maybe, what kind of man waits for the moon to reach its highest point before bringing down the blade? But the real question wasn't how the massacre ended. The question was this: who planned this night of slaughter? And how did the bloodshed begin in a place so tightly controlled? Every rebellion begins as a whisper. In Natchez, that whisper took root long before the blood hit the soil. It began with silence, not the kind born from fear, but the kind that listens, the kind that watches, the kind that waits. Isaac had always been that kind of man. To the overseers, he was just another field hand, quiet, predictable, obedient. His back was strong, his lips sealed. They never noticed how closely he observed, never questioned why he stayed late after dark near the tool shed, or why he helped tend to the sick without being asked. But Isaac was not quiet by nature. He was quiet by necessity. Born into slavery, at the Boudreaux Plantation and sold to the Walker estate at 14, he'd already seen too much. He'd seen his brother beaten to death for spilling a bucket of molasses. He'd seen his mother sold to a Louisiana trader after pleading for her children. And he'd never forgotten the last words his father whispered before disappearing into the swamp with shackles still on his ankles. One day, boy, you burned the house down. And that seed, it took root. What does it take for a man to go from surviving to burning everything down? The answer often is betrayal. It came in many forms: a promise of lighter duties for extra work, broken, a whispered suggestion of freedom papers, forged, even a fellow slave, Marcus, a boy, barely 17, tortured after Isaac was falsely accused of stealing corn. That night, Marcus's screams echoed for hours. No one slept, and Isaac stopped waiting. He didn't want mercy. He didn't believe in it anymore. He wanted justice. Imagine carrying that rage with you each day, hands digging through cotton by morning, heart drowning in hatred by night. Isaac started sharpening tools differently. Not in the open, not at the grinding stone near the barn. No, he did it behind the old chicken coop, where the trees swallowed sound and shadows played tricks on the eye. He began watching the overseer's patterns. Who carried the whip? Who drank the most? Who visited the quarters after dark when no one else was watching and he wasn't alone? Clara, the cook's daughter, smuggled onions and dried meat into Isaac's sack. "You'll need your strength," she whispered once. She never asked questions, but her eyes, they knew. Old Jonah, who had worked the fields for 5 decades, handed Isaac a folded scrap of parchment, a map, hand-drawn. It showed where the night patrols changed shift, where the dogs were fed, where the rifles were kept. "You ain't the first to dream it," Jonah said, "but maybe you'll be the first to finish it." Even the children helped. They played games near the tool shed to distract the guards. They dropped nails where wagons passed to slow the transport of goods. One boy even set loose a horse just to test how fast the overseers responded. It was more than resistance. It was rehearsal. Every detail mattered. The moon's cycle, the dogs' routines, the weather. Isaac waited for the perfect night. Dry, windless, with no guests on the estate and no visiting buyers. But while Isaac prepared for war, the estate continued its routine as if nothing stirred beneath the surface. What would you do if you knew the man standing beside you was planning a massacre, and he never blinked? There were moments when doubt crept in. Not fear of death. Isaac had made peace with that. It was the fear of failure, of dying without making a dent, of being just another name scratched out on a ledger. But then he'd remember Marcus's scream, his mother's tears, his father's promise, and the fear would vanish. He didn't want a rebellion. He wanted a message, a lesson burned so deep into the land that it could never be forgotten. But planning is not doing, and blood has a way of reshaping even the best laid intentions, because Isaac wasn't the only one with a plan, and the night was coming fast. By daylight, the fields told a different story, not of blood, not of blades, but of cotton, miles and miles of it, white, soft, and gleaming under the Mississippi sun. From the veranda of the main house, the plantation looked like a dream. Neat, rows, perfect symmetry, a southern paradise. Porcelain teacups clinked on silver saucers, lace curtains fluttered in the breeze, and inside the grand parlor a phonograph played a slow, sleepy waltz while Miss Delilah, the mistress of the house, thumbed through a French novel with idle boredom. But out past the hedges and beyond, the garden roses, reality bled through like sweat through linen. Out in the fields, skin cracked beneath the sun, fingers bled from the burrs, backs bent not from age but from centuries of command. You could smell it if you stood close enough, the rot of damp soil, the sour tang of unwashed bodies, the heavy stench of fear that no perfume could mask. Slaves moved like shadows, silent, coordinated, rehearsed, eyes low, feet steady. Their mouths rarely opened unless spoken to. Their laughter was a thing remembered only in stories. Imagine watching this unfold with your own eyes. A child no older than 7 lifting a sack, heavier than her frame. A woman with raw lash marks hidden beneath her dress. Men with calloused hands so rough they could slice bark without a blade. And yet, just a few hundred feet away, was the illusion of peace. The overseers strolled through the rows with wide-brimmed hats and shotguns, their boots clean, their hands soft. Some rode horseback. Others chewed tobacco and told dirty jokes about New Orleans girls. But all of them had one job: control. Control the harvest. Control the rhythm. Control the people. Each morning began with a bell. Not a church bell, not a school bell. This one didn't call you to worship or learning. It called you to survival. Breakfast was nothing more than cornbread crusts and leftover broth. No coffee, no sugar, no choices. By sunup, the quotas were announced. Each man had to pick 40 pounds by noon. Each woman, 30. Children were expected to carry water, mend sacks, keep up and/or else. And if they didn't? The punishment tree waited, a towering cypress near the quarters. Branches twisted, bark stripped, rope already dangling. A place so feared that slaves whispered its name like it had a soul of its own. Some say the tree still weeps when the wind blows from the east. One boy, barely 10, had been whipped for humming while working. His back didn't heal, right. Another was beaten for looking too long at the overseer's daughter. No trial, no warning, just bruises and silence. Even weddings had to be approved. Even grief had to be timed. When an infant died in the night, his mother was back in the fields by dawn, tears wiped away before they could stain her blouse, because stains invited questions and questions invited punishment. This was a world where mercy was rationed like molasses, rare and only for the ones who mattered. And in this world there was no escape, not really. The woods were patrolled, the dogs were fast. The rewards for a runaway were posted in town, $25 for a live catch, $15 if dead. Yes, dead. The system was airtight, the cruelty so normal it became law, and yet, inside the very bones of this estate something stirred. A whisper passed between the quarters, a glance too long, a nod exchanged by candlelight. Isaac had been watching, waiting, listening. He saw the extra rations given to one overseer and the girl who had disappeared the next morning. He counted the beatings, tracked the sick, and he watched how the masters celebrated Christmas with parades, while the slaves watched from behind barred windows. Every new injustice was added to the fire growing inside him. But he wasn't the only one. What if you knew the whole field was a powder keg and no one noticed the match? There were others, quiet but alert. Women who smuggled notes in their aprons. Elders who told stories about Haitian rebellions around the fire. Young boys who practiced with blades they carved from scrap metal behind the barn. This wasn't just pain. This was preparation. And if you stood still in that field long enough, you could feel it too. Something darker than the soil, deeper than the roots. Because beneath the cotton, something was growing. And it wasn't just crops. The storm didn't begin with thunder. It began with silence. A silence so thick you could feel it pressing on your chest like the weight of earth over a grave. The overseers noticed it too, though they didn't have the words for it. The slaves were too quiet, too still. No arguments, no coughing, no songs in the field. The air had changed, and though the white men laughed it off over bourbon, some part of them sensed what was coming. They just didn't know how close it was. The axes weren't hidden in the woods or under floorboards. That would have been too obvious. No, they were buried. Each one carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and buried beneath the cane stalks near the edge of the field where the old irrigations trench had caved in years ago. Isaac had marked the spot with 3 rocks arranged in a triangle. Only a handful knew the meaning. Those who did carried that knowledge like a loaded pistol, invisible, deadly, and heavy with purpose. Imagine standing in a field under moonlight, heart pounding, hands shaking, knowing tomorrow you may never see the sun again. Isaac moved like a ghost those last few days. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He ate slowly. He stared at the sky too long. But in his eyes, fire. He watched as the overseers strutted through the quarters, barking orders and swinging their whips. They laughed about the upcoming harvest festival, about the cleaning they'd do before company arrived. Some even joked about how new blood always made the old hands more obedient. They had no idea they were days away from bleeding in those very fields. But Isaac wasn't just preparing a murder. He was orchestrating a memory. What would you do if you knew your death could echo through history? Would you act or would you pray someone else would? On the night before, he visited each co-conspirator one final time. No long speeches, just a nod, a look, a hand on the shoulder. Most of them would never see each other again, not in this world anyway. He stopped last at Clara's window. She was already awake. Her eyes glistened, but her hands didn't tremble. "You'll leave when it starts?" Isaac whispered. She nodded. "The smoke will cover me." He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded square of cloth, part of his mother's head wrap. "For luck," he said. Then he disappeared into the dark. Tick, 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 by. August 13th. The soil beneath Natchez was ripe, not just with cotton but with the scent of vengeance. The moon was nearly full. The dogs had been fed double rations to keep them sleeping through the night. The guards, too, were relaxed, their guns polished but minds dulled by routine. And beneath the very boots of their oppressors, the axes waited, cold, hungry. Direct engagement. Moment. Can you feel it now? The stillness before the thunder? Imagine watching the man who beat your brother every morning, and knowing with absolute certainty that by dawn, he will choke on his own blood. That's what it felt like. There was no turning back. Not now. Every breath was a countdown, every heartbeat, a war drum, every shadow, a soldier waiting to step into fire, and Isaac. He didn't blink. The sun would set only once more before the blades rose, and when they did, Natchez would never be the same again. The moon stood high and quiet, but what happened below it would echo for centuries. It began not with a battle cry, but with breath. Heavy, measured, shared between brothers in pain crouched in the cotton rows. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the earth, slow, uncertain, as if even the land was bracing for what came next. The axes were unearthed in silence. The cotton, still damp with night dew, brushed against their shoulders as they crawled through it like shadows. Isaac led them, his jaw tight, his hands sure. In his eyes, not rage but clarity. This wasn't madness, it was justice. Imagine standing there wrapped in fog, your hand gripping a blade made to cut wood, about to sink it into flesh instead. What would you feel? Fear? Regret? Or something more terrifying? Nothing at all. The first target was Willis, head overseer, known for cracking ribs with a single swing of his whip. He never saw it coming. A quick flash of steel, and his jaw shattered before he could scream. His legs buckled, and a second blow crushed his temple into the dirt. Another, then another. Like lightning flashes, the violence came in bursts. James stumbled from his bunk barefoot, still dazed with sleep. He reached for the shotgun on the wall, but fingers never made it. A figure emerged from the dark, driving the axe down so hard it split his shoulder to the chest. He gargled blood as he fell against the bunk post. 2 down, 5 to go. The dogs howled, finally roused, but they were too late. One tried to leap, but Isaac struck mid-air. The beast yelped once, then silence. The third overseer tried to run. He made it to the edge of the fence before someone, maybe Elijah, maybe Thomas, caught him by the collar and dragged him back, heels scraping against the soil. His pleas turned to wails, then to silence. The massacre wasn't a flurry. It was a rhythm, boots on gravel, breath on frost, steel on bone. 7 overseers, all dead before the cock crowed. Their blood soaked into the cotton fields they once patrolled with arrogance. Their lifeless bodies left in a crooked circle near the tool shed, faces frozen in disbelief, as if they had never imagined that the hunted could become the hunters. And all the while, Isaac stood in the center, his arms limp, axe dangling from a bloodied hand, his face blank, not from shock but from purpose fulfilled. This wasn't revenge, it was rebalancing. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a reckoning. Direct engagement moment. Would you have had the strength to lift that blade? To silence your oppressors knowing it might cost you your life the next sunrise? Because that's what Isaac chose. Not safety, not escape, but fire. The moon disappeared behind a cloud just as they disappeared into the woods. Not a word was spoken. No names, no tears. Only the scent of blood and smoke carried on the breeze. By the time the plantation house lit up, it was too late. The masters burst into the fields, pistols drawn, only to find silence, only to find the red-soaked soil, and a message carved into the door of the barn: never again. But where did Isaac go after the fields ran red? And what became of the legacy built on the blood of the enslaved? The sun rose slowly over Natchez, but no one rejoiced. Not in the master's house, not in the fields, not even in the slave quarters where freedom had always been a distant ghost. The bodies were found stiff and twisted, their axes still nearby, crimson drying beneath fingernails. 7 men, overseers. Each of them feared and hated by those who toiled under the Mississippi sun, now reduced to pale corpses lying in their own shadow. Word spread faster than wind through the cotton. First among the plantations, then down to the town square. Some whispered of a slave uprising. Others said it was vengeance from beyond. Ghosts of the whipped and buried returned to balance the scales. But no one said Isaac's name. Not yet. Imagine standing in that field the morning after. The blood had soaked through the dirt. The tools of labor turned into weapons of war. And the air, heavy not with smoke anymore, but memory. The Walker plantation never recovered. Buyers refused to step foot on the cursed land. The master himself, silent, trembling, left with his family weeks later. His estate shuttered, his crops left to rot in the field. And the slaves? They were questioned, threatened, some even beaten again, in the hopes they'd speak names. But no one broke, no one spoke, because Isaac hadn't acted alone. And the secret wasn't just his. It belonged to every broken back, every scarred child, every mother who buried a son beneath the cane rows. Elijah, the quiet one with a limp, disappeared that very morning. So did Thomas, who once stitched, wounds behind the smokehouse. Others followed. Some likely fled north, others deeper south into marshes and mountains, places maps dared not mark. But Isaac, he was never seen again. Some say he drowned in the river trying to escape. Others claim he walked into the woods with the axe still in his hand, and became a myth, a name whispered by firelight. And maybe that's how it was meant to be, because the system never expected men like Isaac to survive, let alone be remembered. But stories have a way of burning through time, don't they? Years passed. The plantation was sold for pennies. The tool shed collapsed in a storm. The cotton fields grew wild with weeds. But locals say if you stand in those fields, under a full moon the wind still shifts strange. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can still hear footsteps in the dark. Dragging, determined, an axe, a breath, a reckoning. This wasn't just a massacre. It was a message, carved into bone, written in blood, and buried into the land, that even the most broken men can rise. That silence sometimes ends in screams. The story of Isaac and the massacre in the fields of Natchez is not one you'll find in most history books. But it happened. Maybe not exactly like this, but something did. And stories like this, the ones buried, the ones feared, must never be forgotten. If you want to uncover more untold truths, stay with us. The past still burns, and we're just getting started.